Welcome to SUAANGAN. I'm your host, Janine Blake. On today's program, we traveled to Kaktovik, Alaska, where the Arctic Borderlands Ecological Knowledge Co-op held a meeting last October. The co-op was looking for input from the community residents for their ongoing studies on caribou and whaling.
What we would really like to understand tonight is how can this sustainability of our community's project, this thing that we're involved in, benefit Kaktovik? The goals of this project, what we're trying to do, is to improve the ability of communities and scientists to discuss how community life might change in the future and how communities may be able to shape, to change things, to reflect your values, so that together we can benefit life in Alaska, life in communities. Well, there's some terms that we use in this project that one is what we mean by sustainability, and what we mean by forces for change, and what we mean by knowledge. What we mean by sustainability is kind of in four areas: the use of homelands, the areas around that you use from Kaktovik, economic opportunity, local control. We actually worked with you here in Kaktovik back in 1996, as well as with Ecological and Old Crow and Arctic Village, to come up with these definitions of what sustainability means.
Kasi kami o kare Beluga kanok niya kailangan upalin nung naptingni wani in nasamba ka sige put ato ni Beluga na iyo ka kaya nisi ko ba sigunere sama atau chime o kahlone kanok ang laluwit naga kanutol niya ako talo niya kahlawit tamat ko kaya nisi ko ba ka sige nagla isuma tulip tigo ni ito tam na naluwa kami lumagulo tam na kasuti luwit churo wani simuni kaya ngatangan kanok kaya inyo niya ako siya muna tingin pa ito ang lagi ko di kasuluwit churo kagla atulay po simuna nito.
What we mean in both the knowledge that you have from being here for many generations and the knowledge that scientists get through research are both part of what we're thinking of as knowledge.
I thought it meant that the scientist knowledge and the local knowledge could be combined together to work together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we have been living here for a long time. We know what local areas like, our animals, our ocean, our land, and scientists are just getting past their thesis and wanting to learn more about this area from what we've known for many generations. You know, permafrost, climate change, land use, animal usage. That's what those two knowledges are. There's two different.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Because they want to tell us their knowledge too.
We're trying to pay special attention to 4 different areas. One is bowhead whaling, and I should mention that some years ago, I can't remember which meeting, but probably in 1998, we described the project to the Wildlife Management Committee of the North Slope Borough, and the committee endorsed the project, and at the same time said, we hope that you focus on what's happening off our shores, to the bowhead, and what development effects might be to bowhead hunting, and what climate changes might bring. We also understood from our aquatic partners in the project that beluga whale are an important part of aquatics life, and they have also concerns about how beluga hunting can change in the future. So to try to understand a way that we could move forward on understanding oil development effects without getting all messed up with the Anwar political issue. And where we came out was that local communities can do to manage development to their benefit. We might be able to learn from Inuvialuit's experience too, to understand how you as a community of Kaktovik could manage development to your benefit. So that's what that third category is.
You're looking into the future, it hasn't even begun yet. And why make decisions now on something that hasn't happened, you know? That's one part I don't understand.
Okay.
You can take it day by day, you know? Like your study, 40 years from now, what the trend could be straight, it could, you know, go up or down. Maybe the scientists might not be right, but maybe local people might be right. You know?
What he also, what Isaac also said too is that he's already seen the changes in the caribou and their migration. And then another thing too is that Inuvialuit has already experienced the differences in the caribou migration. Is that right, Jane?
When SUAANGAN returns after these messages, the co-op will share the results of their study on bowhead whaling. For traditional subsistence harvesting, the Inuit of the Arctic still go beluga whale hunting. We'll show you how climate change affects beluga whaling.
My name is Steve Braun, as you've already heard, and I'm working on the marine component, or the marine part. And this part came out of, as Jack said, of a meeting with the North Slope Borough Wildlife Department, or Wildlife Committee, and they heard us several years ago, and we were doing mostly porcupine caribou herd, terrestrial, and they said, gee, we're Inuvialuit, we're really interested in the offshore and the marine and the bowhead. And we've looked at the different influences on bowhead whaling. And one of the first influences you've all lived through is the IWC quota. And I've worked on the quota with the IWC since the early 1980s, so I'm very familiar with this and very familiar with how the decreased quota has resulted in decreased landed bowhead whales, and increased quota has resulted in increased bowhead landings. Another item we looked at was wind, and direction and speed of wind on spring whaling in Barrow, which some other Craig George and Craig Nicholson will talk about. Here's just a simple representation of the IWC bowhead quota in the Alaska subsistence bowhead harvest. As the quota went up, the harvest went up from 1978 to 2001. And this is a good example of traditional knowledge working well with Western science. Everything that the Inuvialuit said way back in 1978 about the bowhead, they travel, there's more of them out there, they travel offshore, they're under the ice, you're not counting them all. Some are on the Chukotka side. Well, the North Slope Borough Census, Western science documented all of that for 20 years. The IWC believed it, and the quota went up, and the harvest went up. And the traditional knowledge was proved to be very correct. But also, there has been effects of wind and ice on the spring harvest in Barrow. And Craig, you want to talk about that?
My name is Craig Nicholson, and I think this illustration is a good example of how Western science and traditional knowledge fit together. What we did was Harry Brower and Craig George started out by asking whaling captains and elders what are the things that would make good spring harvesting conditions. in Barrow. And they said three things. They said good offshore winds coming from the east, quite high speeds, that the lead must be open, and there must be good, stable, land-fast ice. They're trying to explain Inupiat knowledge to other scientists in a language that the scientists understand. So we took the scientists like diagrams and charts. So we can represent for any day, we can show the wind direction with this arrow. And if the arrow comes from the east, then that's an easterly wind. And if the arrow is short, it's not a very fast wind, but if the arrow is longer, the wind is a high speed. So we can do this. Craig George takes the daily wind information from the airport, and if we take for say, I'll show you an example for 4 days. April 20th, 1997, the wind is from the northeast, 25 kilometers per hour. So we draw the arrow. The next day, the wind is more from the east, and it's faster. It's 37 kilometers per hour. This is April 21st. Then the next day, the wind changes direction. It comes more from the west. Then the next day, the wind is coming from the southeast again, 23 kilometers per hour. This is exactly the same information, but we just take the arrows off. And now you can see on some days, this shows the wind on April 20th, 21st, 22nd, and then say on April 23rd, if there's a whale that's landed on that day, or 2 whales landed, we show it in a different color. So this is a way that the scientists can look at the information, and we can start to see the patterns that confirm the local knowledge. If we take 1990 to 1997, we take the whole spring season, and we put every day on the chart. This is the wind from every day, 1990 to 1997 in April and May. So if we go back to where we started with this, we said that every year the harvest changes in Barrow in the springtime. It's not the same for 2 years running. And we asked the question, what is changing? And the answer is that the wind is changing every year. Every year wind conditions are different. And so we want to ask the question, in the future with climate change, are there going to be more years where there are good winds like 1993, lots of very good wind from the east, lots of bowhead in the spring, 16 bowhead in Barrow in the spring? Or are there going to be more bad years like in 1992, bad winds mostly from the west and the southwest in Barrow, 2 bowhead whales in the springtime in Barrow? We want to understand why some years are very good, why some years are very bad, in the same way as we've done for this.
When SUAANGAN returns, we'll show you how climate change and offshore oil and gas activities affect caribou hunting and beluga whaling.
At the Wildlife Department, we've been working with you guys for 20 years now, but our money in the borough is going down. And these folks were able to get some federal money that can help us continue to help you guys. One of the things that I think we've done right is look in the stomach of the bowheads each year out here. That's helped you get a deferral area where they won't, hopefully they won't ever lease out here. But that's helping you guys a lot, that we can prove that whales feed out here. So on this project, that's one thing we want to continue to look at. Well, okay, we've talked about some of these things already, but the other thing I'm interested in is, and I've been working on this study to figure out how much bowheads need to eat to live. And that's by looking at how big they are and how much energy they need to survive. So I've been studying that some. And then really one of the main things that our department's tried to do, especially Tom Albert, for the last 20 years that he was working here, is to help protect the habitat out there from oil and gas development. So one thing, if we can show effects of seismic boats and that sort of thing, deflecting whales, and we've already seen it, there's scientific studies that prove that bowheads go around operating seismic ship by almost 20 miles. And I'm hoping that we can, on this study, get all this information, where you caught the whales, where the ice was, where the seismic ships were, and what the weather conditions were, and look at the whole thing and be able to convince oil companies and the federal government that, you know, hopefully that we can help protect these areas and show that there are effects from oil and gas activities. I guess it's a complicated way of saying that I hope we can use some of this study to show that you guys are right about what you've been saying about offshore oil and gas development.
The last time I was here, Herman Aishana caught a whale, and I got to help measure and collect samples from that whale. But today I would like to talk with you a little bit about beluga hunting. I've worked on beluga whales for about 10 or 11 years, but most of the work that I've done is over in Point Lay and Point Hope. So I know a great deal, I know a fair amount about the belugas from that area, both from the hunters and from the scientific work I do, but I know relatively little about the belugas in your area. But I don't know how important beluga whales are to your village. And so one of the things that we hope to learn from you here the next day or two is how much you would like to be involved in the beluga portion of this project. The belugas that come to this area spend the winter down near St. Lawrence Island. They come over to the McKenzie River Delta, where the Ecological hunters hunt them. And then we really didn't know that much about where they traveled after that. These two maps show where male beluga whales traveled and where female belugas traveled. So here's the McKenzie River Delta. Here's Banks Island. Barter Island, I think, is just off the map here. And you can see that the males went up way up into the ice north of Banks Island, while the females stayed much further south. In the springtime, they come past Barrow and the leads in large numbers, sometimes in thousands of belugas and many thousands of belugas, sometimes just one or two at a time.
They separate from the female and male?
Sometimes. Not always. Sometimes there's groups with males and females. Sometimes there's groups with just males.
Okay.
These lines represent where belugas traveled from Point Lay, and we were very surprised at how far north they went. This is 600 or 700 miles to the north, and how far to the east they came. Here's the Canada border, Canada-Alaska border, and they came over into Canada waters. This is where some belugas were tagged, and they were just several weeks ago. They also came over here near Canada. So there are belugas from two different groups that come to this area. So this is some of the scientific knowledge we have that we've been collecting because hunters in Point Lay and other areas were interested in learning more about where belugas went. We would like to know more in this project. We would like to know more about what affects belugas here in this area, especially for Aklavik and the McKenzie River Delta, but also what might be of interest to you and what affects belugas here in Kaktovik and the Barter Island area.
So I'm Sharman Haley, and I work at the University of Alaska Anchorage. My interest in this project is the possible effects of oil and gas development on communities, and what communities can do to control the effects of oil and gas on their communities. And the way I'm going about this piece of the project is looking at the experience of New Ixit with oil and gas development, and using that experience to come talk with you to think through how oil and gas development in the future could affect Kaktovik and how Kaktovik might take control of oil and gas development to ensure that your values are protected and you get benefits out of it.
Next, as a community, we're still learning the process of working with the oil and gas industry. It hasn't been easy. It's very important that a local control be established, because our experience in Inuvialuit, that leaders recognized that if we didn't start that quick, then the oil and gas industry and the state people who might own the land, or on paper say they own the land and the waters, when those permits get approved, they're just going to come right in and walk all over you, and not care about, Inupiat subsistence, traditional law, and knowledge. And if there's concern from anyone in Inuvialuit, whether it's a kid, an elder, adult, if they feel that there's concern, to respond to that, they'll call me at my office or come by my office and we'll talk about it. I'll get on the computer, write that letter real fast. I've been getting some real good response the last 3 years, not only from the North Slope Board Planning Department and the Planning Commission, but from people in Juneau, from people in Anchorage, Fairbanks, state levels, and even people from Washington, D.C. If oil and gas should start up in your area, have that self-determination, decide for yourselves how you want to deal with them. People in Barrie will help you, people in Anchorage will help you, the right people if you find them. But oftentimes what you'll discover is that they want to learn from you. 5 years ago, the oil and gas industry didn't give a darn about how we felt about their activity. Now they got the Culture Guardian to work for Inuvialuit, the city office. Kupik Corporation has a subsistence oversight panel to protect our hunting rights, our land use, to protect us as people. You can rely on outside sources of information, but rely on your own traditional knowledge, rely on yourselves as a community. Create these positions. You can create a culture guardian or a cultural liaison, someone who will speak and write letters and talk to the oil and gas people and talk to the people in Anchorage and in Juneau and Washington, D.C. And if you find that right person or people to do that for you locally, people who live in Kaktovik, who know the area, you're going to find out that from these people outside your community are going to pay attention. And if they just come and one thing goes one in the ear, not the other, you make sure that they hear you. Make sure that they understand you or try to understand you.
That was our program for this week. Thank you for watching SUAANGAN. I'm your host, Janine Blake, and I'll see you next week, where we'll bring you the study that the Arctic Borderlands Ecological Knowledge Co-op did on the effects of development on caribou.